I would like to start today just really introducing our two speakers. So today we have Stephanie Ciccone-Nascimento and Felicity Hassan. Stephanie is a career coach with coconutcoaching.com who helps tech professionals land their ideal next job. Throughout her career, she supported hundreds of job seekers get their job at tech companies and really loves to work with folks to help them get unstuck when it comes to job hunting and interviewing. She provides tools, hacks, and preparation tips necessary to accelerate the job search and helps people master interview skills so they can secure the bag. Felicity has built a successful career in executive search, both on the agency side and in-house. The opportunity to work with both sides has offered her a true understanding for the process and complexity of talent strategy. And as a result, she has gained an appreciation for her clients and candidates and the best way to navigate a search. She is currently the managing director for Involve and Audelis in New York City. So thank you both for joining us today. It's really exciting to have you both here and in this conversation. As I mentioned earlier, this is designed to be a bit more interactive, and so we wanted to get a sense for who's actually in the room. Part of the registration process was answering a few questions about yourself, but this is also a way for us to get a sense for who's now in the room, who maybe wasn't able to contribute to the registration. So I'm going to run a poll that asks the question, are you a job seeker? Are you part of a company hiring? Are you neither? You're just here to observe. And then before COVID hit, had you interviewed or hired fully remote before? Like, do you have experience with this? So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll, and then we can get a sense for who's here, what are your experiences, and then that'll help with us moving forward. So just take a second, click on one of those buttons, and get a sense for what's on. Cool. So we've got a lot of voyeurs in the room. That's fun. We also have people who have interviewed before fully remote, and not as many people who've really hired remote before. So that's interesting. And then definitely some job seekers, some hiring companies. So it's a bit nice of a mix here of everybody that's present. So I'll give you one more second to finish that up if you want to. Cool. So with that, just to give a sense for everybody that's present, I'd like to begin by handing the digital mic over to Stephanie with the conversation. So Stephanie, the world has shifted almost overnight to remote and social distance workplaces. I know that you've been working remotely for a while now. What do you think candidate concerns have been about searching and interviewing remotely, and how, if at all, do you see that change now that it's in place and a mandate for some people?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me, Park, and everyone, thanks for joining. So as far as concerns, I think what's really top of mind for candidates right now is just, can I get a job? Who's hiring? How do I stand out? I think we're all in this really unique situation, and what's really heightened, I think, is, can I get a job right now in this market? We see a lot of layoffs happening. We see the job market being flooded with job seekers. So I think a lot of folks are really thinking about, what move do I want to make? Can I get a job? How do I do so? If so, how quickly, things like that. And then as far as interviewing, of course, we know the whole process is remote and virtual now. So I think mastering sort of the virtual interviewing piece is definitely top of mind as well. How do I stand out in a video interview when I can't meet people in person? I think those are things that people are thinking about, candidates specifically. And then the other big piece is just sort of what are companies doing, in response to COVID. I think that my clients specifically are asking about that, and just it's giving insight into how companies are handling, treating their employees, or just kind of responding in this moment in general. So I think that's coming up in interviews a lot as well. I would say those are, that heightened anxiety around getting a job in general is probably the top thing. But I think those are some of the things that candidates are definitely thinking about right now. Curious, Felicity, I know that you have a little bit more insight on the company side of things. do you know what types of adjustments companies are making on their side of things in terms of addressing concerns that candidates have at all?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Again, thanks very much, Park, for having me on this conversation. I think that what I've been hearing from organizations is that this is an incredibly humbling experience. I think that there's a lot of organizations that had not necessarily adjusted to the concept of work from home. I'm sure that will not come as a shock to a lot of the people on this call. The concept of flexibility and work from home was something which felt a little foreign to people. Stephanie, I'm sure that this is something that you've come across as you've coached people in the past as they navigate the concept of trying to perhaps negotiate for a remote working experience. They hadn't experienced that, so the senior leadership really kind of weren't necessarily on board. And now for the most part, unless you're really in kind of a frontline position, most of us are absolutely mandatory work from home. And that has just organically shifted the entire landscape of how people think about the concept of interviewing and hiring people remotely. So I think that the concept of leadership shifting their thought process from you can't be productive from home, from oh wow, I can be productive from home, and therefore presumably other people can also be productive from home. Who would have thought it? You know, that situation has actually been like a real light bulb moment, and it seems like so basic and so obvious for many of us who work from home, but it wasn't for everybody historically. So we're there now. Everybody has pretty much had this experience now. They've all been working from home. So when I think about just the basic tenets, obviously there's kind of a logistical element to onboarding somebody if you aren't used to this. People are trying to really kind of adapt how they get people set up on technology, how they get hardware out to individuals, how they get people kind of set up on their infrastructure, essentially how they kind of make sure that they get through firewalls and security systems. For the most part, that's actually pretty straightforward. It's just kind of a matter of shifting your kind of supply chain process and your logistics to get that done. And it'll also be kind of learning new tricks. There are elements, certainly even in our organization, that I just wasn't familiar with. There are details that I wasn't aware of, and now I am. So it's a matter of just kind of making sure that you're intellectually curious about how that process works, so you can really make sure it's a smooth process for individuals. Virtual ID checks, the I-9 verification and things like that. But most importantly, and I think this is hopefully something that we'll touch on again during the conversation, is just a general empathy and a kindness we're seeing from people. If you're at home, your home setup, your home work setup is going to be different from the person who's interviewing you. And no better, no worse, just different. You're going to be essentially in somebody's living room or bedroom, or in my instance, their closet. And you're going to learn something about somebody that you didn't know before. And I think that there's an element of just be sympathetic to the fact that if this person's a single parent, their child's going to come into the room at some point. And I think as long as we feel confident and empowered to say, hey, I'm in an unusual situation, I just wanted to give you a heads up that I might be interrupted at some point. It doesn't mean that I'm not focused on this meeting. I just wanted to let you know that that might happen. In the same way that if you were having an in-person meeting and you knew that you were expecting an urgent call from somebody, you'd just say, hey, by the way, I think I'm going to get a call during this meeting and I might have to dash out. I hope you don't mind. It's not that I'm not, it's the usual kind of like common sense things, but they're even more prevalent now because of the circumstances that we're in. So I am seeing a greater empathy from our clients who would perhaps otherwise have been a little bit more buttoned up if they were meeting you in a conference room. Now they're kind of like, hey, yeah, sure, I expect you to be dressed appropriately for this interview. I expect you to be putting on a good face and like selling the experience that you've got. But at the same time, if the environment that you're in isn't absolutely ideal, I get it. So, that is something which I've really appreciated about the clients that I've spoken to and the clients that we're still recruiting for.
Nice. Yeah. I think the whole leading with empathy is definitely, that's what I'm telling my clients in all communication, over email, in person. It's, just understanding that we're all in unique situations and being impacted differently. So that definitely makes sense that it's happening from both ends. For sure.
And in terms of like tips and tricks, I mean, you've been helping people to interview remotely for a long time now. So I would imagine that a lot of those tips and tricks, like remain true through this process. And I think that's kind of been a tricky dynamic for people. Like, how do I turn up in a remote setting,
Mm-hmm.
so to
Mm-hmm.
speak?
Yeah.
What can you share about that? Just some kind of practical guidance.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I have lots of tips around that. I think so. The biggest change, I think, in interviewing right now, of course, everything's remote, but really the biggest chunk of it that's remote is the in person, the part of the interview that would be in person. So I have, some of my clients are sitting on Zoom calls for 3 to 4 hours at a time, doing sort of back-to-back calls, or presenting. And so I think that can be really taxing, or just kind of, different way to build rapport. So it's super important. I think a couple tricks and tips just off the bat is to really do your best to set up a good, make sure your video, present yourself professionally. I think that's really key. It's super important. So dressing up for that, making sure your background is simple, not distracting as much as you can, make sure you have good lighting, all of that kind of stuff that you kind of can control ahead of an interview. Make sure you set that up. I would even test it out, open the Zoom or whatever video conference, and just see how you come across. Another thing is make sure you're high energy. So it might feel a little bit different to try and build rapport over video, but you really, especially in this moment, you want to be positive. You want to show enthusiasm, that you're excited to be talking to this person and that you're excited about the role. I think that's really important. And for some, that may feel a little bit more performative than for others, but just know that it's a good way to kind of come across initially and make a good first impression. Other thing is, be prepared. So just make sure that you know who you're talking to, the company, what they do, the problem they solve, the products they have. Do research, read as much as you can about who you're talking to, and really come prepared and understand that you should be able to articulate what they do back to them. So that's a common interview question you could get, tell us what you think we do in your own words type of thing. And then prepare responses to common questions that you could get. So understand, the role that you're interviewing for and what types of questions you could get, and just practice them out loud. I tell this to my clients all the time. Time yourself, make sure your responses are 90 seconds or less. Make sure you're not rambling. Make sure you understand and have a good idea for how you would respond to common questions, and just practice those out loud all the time. And then the other thing is bring questions for the interviewer. I think that's a huge, the questions that you ask in an interview are just, will reflect back to them sort of your knowledge, what you're thinking about, what's important to you as you're qualifying the company and the role and seeing if it's a good fit. So your questions are just as important. Strong questions will make you stand out as a candidate. So make sure that you prepare those and are ready to ask those as well. On a high level, those are sort of, the things I would say. Some of them you would do in a regular, I would suggest all these in a regular interview, but the big difference, I think, is really just make sure you have that, stay upbeat and positive and come across professionally over video, essentially.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, a couple of things that you flag there, which I think, come up time and time again and are so important, irrespective of whether or not you're remote or in person, is preparation and questions.
Mm-hmm.
That you cannot over prepare for these situations. And I think, in a time when people are feeling anxious about the environment, as well as perhaps their job search, I think that preparation is absolutely key.
Yeah.
There are critical pieces here, and I think as we move towards a behavioral based interviewing style, I think you're absolutely right, Stephanie. Preparation about the individuals who are hiring is always so important. People love to talk about themselves, and even if it doesn't come up in the interview, it's a great icebreaker.
Mm-hmm.
People that you're meeting with, so that you can kind of speak to, oh my goodness, I read in your bio that you're really into meditation. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Just anything which kind of helps you break the ice in a situation where you're not necessarily in person is a really kind of useful tool. So I would say always learn about the individual there, prepare about yourself, prepare your narrative. Actually, that's one of the things which is easy to overlook. Understand what's on your resume, understand your story, give people an understanding of the thread that runs through it. If there are things which kind of like deviate you off course, making sure that you're you're able to really kind of talk about, you know, why you decided to kind of stray out of software engineering into circus performance for a brief period of time. Like, look, hey, cool, everyone kind of takes like different paths, but just make sure that you kind of have some kind of narrative around it so that you can say, this is what I was thinking as I was doing that. And then I think also just making sure that you have some really good examples. One thing which I think really helps humanize a situation, and this was something which I really picked up during my time at Audible, which has kind of trickled down from some of the Amazon practices, is have a sense of kind of like deep examples which illustrate, you know, how you align with the culture of the organization that you're interviewing for. Not only examples which illustrate your technical depth for the role, but illustrate your actual like cultural acuity to the organization as well, and your commitment to some of the community efforts that they're engaged in. That I think is a really kind of nice additional thought.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those deep examples, like, they can be hard to think of on the spot, but if you have an example which really kind of illustrates some of like your personal characteristics and your technical characteristics, I don't think people would begrudge you for using the same example. Just kind of make sure that you have enough data that you can really kind of dig down on it. So that preparation point that you made is just so important. And then obviously the other kind of two pieces are having something which demonstrates your self-awareness. No one banks examples of when they've done badly or when they've failed. Like, it's just not human nature for us to do it, but people will ask you about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of giving like a brush off answer around like, you know, why, you know, it's so difficult because, you know, your biggest negative quality is how hard you work, or you've never really experienced like a hardship. It's just not going to fly. So make sure that you have something which really kind of demonstrates your ability to kind of fail, acknowledge failure, come back from it, pick yourself up from the mat, as Brene Brown would say, and keep on moving. Like, those kind of self-awareness points are so important. And then Stephanie, to your point, I cannot reiterate enough like that, just that ability to really kind of ask questions at the end,
Mm-hmm.
show your intellectual curiosity. But the other thing which I would love to kind of get your take on, Stephanie, is confidence right now. I always say to candidates over and over again, you have to present like the positive of what you've gained from previous experiences. Nobody wants to hear, you know, the negatives, or why you didn't get on with your boss or something. You know, everyone wants to hear like the positives. They want to hear a confident story. They want you to present with confidence. But I don't know about you, I'm not feeling that confident right now all the time, you know, homeschooling children, you know, working into the night. There's a million different things coming at us, you know, worrying where my mask is before I go to the supermarket to get groceries. There's so many like environmental factors that are coming at us, which are going to kind of chip away at that confidence. What kind of tips do you have in kind of like harnessing some of that anxiety and those emotions as you embark on these interviews to try and like demonstrate that confidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, this time, as we've been saying, sort of everyone's in a real unique situation. Some have kids, some have done, you know, we're all impacted very differently. And I think when it comes time to, you know, get on a video interview, it's, you know, as we mentioned in the beginning, I think a lot of people have empathy for the situations that folks are in. I do suggest, so one thing is, this is a really good time to reflect on what next move you want to make. So I would suggest before, if you have the resources and time, take a moment to just reflect and think about, do I want to make a career pivot? Do I want to upskill and learn a new skill and, you know, change industries? Because this is a good time to be doing that. So once you have clarity around that and you have an idea of the direction you want to go, I think confidence often comes from just knowing where you're trying to go. And I think interviewers are often looking for that, you know. So if you get on a video call and say, I would take any job, that's not really a good response. That's not really the energy that people are looking for. People are looking for folks who know they want to, you know, go in the direction they want to go, and they won't really stop at this particular interview until they get to where they want to go. So I think a combination of being prepared as much as possible. Of course, you'll get questions that you might not, you know, be prepared for, but I think the better prepared you are, the more you can kind of answer, you know, ad lib and feel and kind of come across confident, knowing that you have an idea of where you're trying to go, the role that you want. I think, to your point, Felicity, you're saying you have a really compelling reason why you're talking to who you're talking to. You need to understand, you know, why them, why now, why this role. You need to be able to articulate that in the interview. So the more you can do that, the more you'll come across confident, because you know what you want. So I think it's important to really understand, you know, for example, I have, sometimes clients come to me and they say, I want to apply to operations roles, customer success roles, and sales. And the first thing I say to them is you need to pick one of those, because your narrative is going to be very confusing, and you need to just know where you want to go and pick one of those, because as you interview, your narrative gets stronger and stronger, and you can refine it throughout the process if you know you're just going to go after an operations role or a customer success role. But if you're kind of going all over the place, that you're going to come across as all over the place a little bit. And I've seen that happen. And so really get clear about where you're trying to go, and go after that, and then start practicing your narrative, start understanding how you're coming across, how you're responding, and listen to the feedback you're getting in interviews. If a response comes across really well, you'll know the how you're building the rapport. You'll start understanding the questions you're going to get for that particular role, and you can prepare for those for future interviews. And also, even ahead of that, make sure you're branding points in the direction that you want to go. So if you're going after a particular role, if you're pivoting careers, all of that, your resume, your LinkedIn needs to point in that direction. It needs to brand itself towards where you're looking to go. So I think all of those things, overall will build confidence. And once you start getting responses, I think that just naturally you'll feel confident, because you'll be like, okay, people want to talk to me. So, of course, we all have many things happening right now and are juggling many things, but I think confidence comes from a combination of being prepared, understanding who you're talking to, and all of that, and then also understanding the direction that you want to go, and feeling confident that it makes sense for you, the narrative you're sharing makes sense, and getting that feedback. Felicity, I'm curious, from your perspective, have you, on the company side of things, do you know, our hiring teams, what do you think hiring teams should be doing, in terms of improving the process? Is there anything that you, in your research, that you think that has come up around sort of making the candidate experience really strong right now in this particular moment?
Yeah, great question. And I think some great points that you just made as well. If I think about like how clients are looking at this, I mean, beyond the points I made earlier about like empathy and a greater understanding for the importance of remote working, or the productivity that you can get from remote workers, I think what I'm seeing is, and my advice to clients where I feel like people are doing this well, is putting a candidate at ease. Even though I think all of us are probably very rapidly, Park most of all, becoming super users of Zoom, and Skype and Ring Central and Google Hangout and you name it, we're all becoming like great with this tech wizardry. At the same time, it is still relatively new. Like maybe we'd been using these tools like intermittently on and off, and now basically this is kind of like our core portal to both like business and life. So it's really important, if you're not in person and you can't kind of demonstrate body language or full body language, and look, you might not want to be showing full body language, you might be working in a shirt and underpants, but I think that's probably quite common actually these days. But try and put somebody at ease. Try and make sure that they feel comfortable in the setting. I think now more than ever, when you're not like physically in a room with someone, I think this is really important in person as well, but now when you're not in the room with somebody, like take a minute to throw in something anecdotal, take a minute to kind of share a little bit of a story about you, just to kind of put people at ease, make it a little bit more of a human experience. Again, you're inviting them into your home office space, you're going into their home office space, like make it a little bit more of a personal experience. And I would say increase contact. I think that's probably one of the greatest challenges, or one of the biggest pieces of feedback that you get in the recruitment process, is that you don't hear enough. Like, I don't know where I am in a process. I don't know where I am with this organization. I don't know how I did. Try and really increase communication with people. Make sure that they're really comfortable with the kind of setting that you're going to be interviewing with. Please make sure that they're prepared. Make sure that candidates are prepared for the situation. Make sure that they know who they're meeting. So that they can really, so to all of your points, Stephanie, and all the points that we've both flagged, so that you can prepare accordingly. You know what Bob's background was, you know what Sarah does. It's really important to be able to have that preparation and give candidates the opportunity to really present the best of themselves. So I think increased contact from the hiring team is really important. The interviewing team, like putting people at their ease, is going to be important. Again, showing a little bit of empathy for a changed situation that people are in, and saying like, hey, if there are interruptions, like don't worry about it, don't let it throw you off. You know, volunteer it. Don't wait for them to say, hey, I might have an interruption. Like volunteer this kind of like human side of yourself and just say, look, I get it. We're not necessarily all in an ideal situation, but I'm really excited to be speaking to you today. Just making sure you're putting people at their ease, and get to know people. You know, the one thing which I've really learned from this experience on the client side as I work with clients is, you know, this has actually been an opportunity. I'm not usually in their living room. I don't usually see their child running around naked in the background, but I do today. So this is an opportunity for me to kind of get to know you a little bit more. Like, let's make it like a little bit more human, a little bit less corporate, and try and actually really kind of form a little bit of a relationship in this process as well. So I think that there's an opportunity here. This has been kind of a great leveler for so many people. There's more fathers doing more parenting. There's more, you know, there's more people at home like really kind of taking on all of the daily tasks and mundane chores that they perhaps wouldn't have before. You know, that there's a whole leveling of society right now, which I think is a great opportunity for us to really think about leading differently, and exploring like new ways of doing things. But I think if anything kind of stood out to me in terms of how clients and candidates should deal with this situation, it's increase the empathy, increase the kindness and the gratitude factor, and make sure that kind of really plays out in the interviewing process. So that's kind of like been a big thing which has come up for me. In many ways, there's a lot of ways that kind of the traditional interview process can kind of translate. When you think about like due diligence on the company and being prepared and like dressing professionally and things like that, like they all seem like sometimes like a little bit sort of silly factors. And I've seen many people show up in different ways to meetings. How does that, you know, how do you prioritize and how do you stack rank those kind of things? Because we've talked about some of those kind of basic logistics, but these are kind of just the practical steps, which I do think are really important.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think we've been emphasizing the importance of being prepared in a lot of different ways. So definitely due diligence on the company, the role, the person, you know, just know who you're talking to and be able to essentially articulate that. As far as being prepared for various questions, I can dig a little bit deeper into that. The types of questions you get. So there's essentially 4 different types of interview questions that candidates get. You're going to get screening questions, situational questions, skill-based questions, and behavioral questions. So I would prepare for all those. You could get those at every stage of the interview process, and just be ready to answer those different types of questions. And particularly, I would say practice the behavioral types of questions. So anytime a question starts with, tell me about a time you failed, tell me about a time you got critical feedback, those are generally the most challenging for candidates because it essentially is asking you to tell a short, relevant story in the STAR format, if you've heard of that, that essentially demonstrates the qualities that they're looking for in that question. So I highly, highly recommend practicing those out loud, you know, practicing that format. The STAR format allows you to be really concise and clear, and this allows you to essentially lay out the situation, explain the task that you had, explain the action that you took and the result you got. And I would add in I would add an L to that, which is your learning. So when you tell a story in that format, it's really powerful because you're essentially demonstrating and showing in a concise way, like this is how I've handled something in the past, or this particular thing you're asking about. And those, you want to have many of those stories ready to share. I would say, think about a time all the common ones, think about a time you failed, time you've had to give feedback or receive feedback, or a time you've just had to overcome a challenge during work. Make them as all work related if possible. And just practice telling those stories out loud. And I used to, you know, one of the advantages of having a virtual interview is that you can have cues in front of you. You know, you can have sticky notes on your screen, whatever it may be. You can have your resume in front of you. So I used to actually do this when I just regular interviewing. I would have cues for if someone asks me about failure, I'm going to tell this story. If someone asks me about feedback, I'm going to tell this story. So I would say definitely practice those, especially. And then the most common question you're going to get is tell me about yourself. So really get that narrative right. What people asking for in that question is tell me about your work history and what you're looking for next. So you can go chronologically with the most relevant roles, tell them about what you've been doing, and then end on what you're looking for next. Like, why are you talking to me right now? It's kind of what they want to hear. Tell me about your work history and why we're talking right now. So all of those, prepare for different types of questions you could get, like in those categories. Again, it's screening questions. So who are you? What motivates you? Skill-based questions, so your actual technical skills and actual things that like tools you know how to use and things like that. Situational questions, so hypothetical situations and how you would respond, like what would you do if you had a difficult customer interaction, things like that. And then the behavioral questions, which are the tell me about a time you've handled something in the past in this particular way, like how have you responded in this situation. Those are the big ones. And then, of course, again, preparing strong questions. All of those are going to make you stand out, I think, during the interview. If people are wondering how to even get to the interview portion, the way you're going to stand out and the way you're even going to get an interview is to do what I have been teaching pre and post, like right now during COVID, and it's super important, but I think always is to reach out directly to people and make connections and ask for calls. So, I was on a call the other day with other job seekers, and I was chatting with a recruiter, and he was like, if you're not reaching out to 50 or more people a week, like, then what are you doing, kind of. So I teach, and that's more than what I teach my clients. I tell my clients they need to be reaching out to 30 companies per week directly. And as we mentioned, the job market is flooding with job seekers. If you're wondering how to stand out, you need to reach out directly to people. Everyone's online. Everyone is, leverage the online communities, leverage LinkedIn. People are looking for you right now. Recruiters are looking for standout candidates. So make sure your brand online is pointing in direction that you want to go. And also just reach out directly to folks and ask for calls, because not many people are doing that. And applying online is not going to be the fastest way. So I work in tech. So this is like kind of tech related. It's not true for all industries, but I would say build relationships and get your foot in the door that way. That's much faster. I just had a client land 2 competing offers in 23 days. And a huge piece of her success was this high volume outreach that she was doing, and the conversation she was getting into the interview process much faster. She didn't apply. I mean, my clients don't apply online. So people are definitely hiring. I think it's about people to people right now, especially right now. It's always really like that, but especially right now. So I would say all those tips will definitely help you stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, no, I think that those are some really good points, and I couldn't agree more. I think that 50 is bullish. 50 is a lot. 50 is a lot to track. I think that 30 is probably is pretty good right now. Ordinarily, when I'm speaking to people, I usually say a little bit less, just because I want to make it. Coming back to all of those points that we made previously, the one thing which I think is really important when you're applying for opportunities, research. So I would say that the volume of outreach directly correlates to the amount of time you can dedicate to your research. If you aren't able to research the company, find somebody on LinkedIn to reach out to and then send a meaningful note to that individual, then don't do it. You're wasting an opportunity if you're making an application and you're not putting sufficient thought into it. I think when you go into that outreach, I usually say kind of bracket your outreach, and apologies for anyone on this call who's heard me kind of go through this soapbox routine in the past, but try and bracket it into 3 core columns, which is, the first one is find individuals who can make it rain for you. Find individuals who can actually really make a connection for you and help you get your foot in the door, either at their company or somebody else's. And write a meaningful note to them to make sure that they understand the situation that you're in and have absolute clarity on what you're asking them for. I think historically there was a tendency to be like, hey, let's grab lunch, or let's grab a coffee, or I'd love to just kind of like get your thoughts on. I would cut that. I would just go straight in with, hey, this is the situation that I am in at the moment. I'm looking for a new opportunity. I'd really love it if you could connect me to Steve. I think that it seems as if he could probably use some support from somebody with my expertise. Let me know if the intro email below would be applicable for you to send up, that kind of thing, just to kind of make sure that you're reaching out to a busy person. You're not kind of taking up their time by asking them to read between the lines. And then I have like a middle column, which is like direct job applications. You're absolutely right, Stephanie. Like, organizations are still hiring, not all of them. But there are companies that are still hiring. So find the companies that are hiring, look at the opportunities that are applicable for you. To your point, Stephanie, make sure that you have a direction that you're looking to go in and that you're not all over the place applying for like a bunch of different jobs. Make sure that you know what it is that you're looking for, make an application there, and then reach out to somebody who's probably at the top of the chain, I would say, for that hiring practice. Reaching out to the recruitment team or the HR team is useful up to a point. But if you're applying for an opportunity in marketing, I'd be inclined to just reach out to the CMO. They're on LinkedIn too. Reach out to them and see what their priorities are for the department, and make sure that you have like a very sort of short, concise, punchy message to them. You know, hey Susan, I've been reading about some of the cool stuff that you've been doing within the marketing department over there at X Corporation. These are some of the things that I've been doing, which I think really align. I noticed that you were looking for an opportunity. I'd love to have a chat with you to see if I'd be a fit. Do let me know when's a good opportunity for us to speak. That kind of thing. Short, brief, to the point. You've done some research. You've got a couple of things which you think will resonate with Susan. Boom, send it out and do like a follow-up in a couple of weeks' time. I think, you know, this is the really important stuff, but it's really important that you are thoughtful about it and that you make yourself stand out. That's really what this is about. This is about how do you become a standout candidate in a market which is there are going to be a lot of good candidates out there. So your ability to really stand out and make yourself shine is so important. And then I think, you know, to add in, to kind of get up to that 30 outreach, throw in a couple of aspirational companies there as well, companies that you're just really passionate about, or you love what they're doing, or you've been a big admirer of theirs for a while, or they're just based at the end of your block, and at the point at which you might have to go back to work, they'd be a handy place to work. You know, think about those organizations as well, and maybe kind of supplement some of that outreach with those. But I think, you know, that the key takeaway here is what I've found in a business development role, which is probably not the ideal role that you want during a period of time where lots of people are laying off, is that industries are still open for business in many respects. And there are still companies who are active, and there are still key roles that are being hired. And look, there are definitely some skill sets which are probably, you know, practically more in demand than others. I think across the board, I think that there's definitely been less of a dip in demand for technology. But look, I'm seeing opportunities within HR, within strategy, within technology, within sales, within procurement, logistics. There's a pretty broad range out there. And for the right organization, there will be opportunities. And hey, the opportunities that might have only been open to you in your local area historically, you might be able to look at opportunities across the country now, because there could be a situation where a lot of these opportunities could be remote for the longer term as well. So I think this is also an opportunity for us to kind of think more broadly about our job search and not necessarily be limited by geography. What do you think about that, Stephanie? What's your perspective on, you know, this being kind of a greater opportunity to expand that remote workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this time, I think companies particularly are realizing that perhaps actually virtual interviewing, you know, is an innovation that they can continue doing, you know, post this moment. And I think my hunch is that companies will be more open to remote work, to employees wanting to be remote, all of that. I think if it's something that you are wanting to do, you know, as a candidate, it's something you need to ask about in the interview process. So of course, you know, everyone's being onboarded remotely right now, and everyone's, you know, remote for the foreseeable future, potentially for the rest of this year. I don't know. But if it's something that you're wanting to do after this time, it's something you need to get clarity on, you know, while you're interviewing. It's one of those questions you can be asking, you know, can this role be remote after this time, or can it be a hybrid situation where I go in once a week, or whatever it may be? Just make sure from the candidate side that you're asking those questions and getting clarity. And again, just making sure that you're sort of figuring out if it's a fit in that particular way as well. But I think for sure there's going to be a surge in, some of us have already been doing it. Some of us are doing it now and love it. Some of us hate it. It's going to be all over the board. But I think minimally we can all empathize with this situation and understand that some people would prefer to work this way even after this moment. So I think that's going to be a huge piece that's going to sort of keep going after this time for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a great point. And I think it, as you say, I think it comes down to the confidence of making sure that you're asking the question. And it's a really tough, actually, Park and I were touching on this earlier. It's a tough question to ask, like asking for that to remain remote is, not quite as bad, but not far off the conversation about compensation. It's a tricky one, and it's asking people to kind of really analyze your work and your productivity and trust you to do something where you won't be kind of closely observed. And I think it's really important that you take a record and really be thoughtful about analyzing your productivity and your work product during this period of time that you're remote, so that when you do have that conversation, you can actually come back and say, hey, look what I've achieved from home. How's about I continue doing this 3 days a week? And then I feel like you're kind of backing up the point with like a little bit of data, which will hopefully help kind of push that point over the line.
Yep. And I think that's true for anything that's important to you. So just really quick on asking questions in interviews, one of the things I teach my clients is that you need to think about what's important to you. So if diversity and inclusion is an important value, as an example, ask direct questions about it. You're qualifying them as much as they're qualifying you, right? So I think particularly in this remote setting, you need to ask those questions that are personally important to you. You want to understand how the team and the company operates. You want to understand if you line up with their values. You want to understand, do you get along with the person who would potentially be your manager? What's their leadership style? You got to ask all those types of questions to really understand if you're fit, if they're fit for you. So for sure. Yeah. But with that, Park, should we hand it over to you for Q&A?
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been such a fabulous discussion, and it's really awesome to see you guys tete-a-tete on this conversation. So thank you for that. So we'll move into the Q&A section. We want this to be as engaging as possible. So everybody, at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box. You can write questions directly into there, or if you would like to ask a live question, you can use the raise hand function. And I can unmute you and you can ask Felicity or Stephanie directly. So definitely would love to have any kinds of questions about working remote. So Hannah, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you and you can ask your question.
Hi.
Hi.
I just graduated with my bachelor's, and now I get to find a job in this time, which is another kind of challenge. I found it interesting how you said to keep your storyline very concrete and practice it. Now, being in business management and during my studies, I kept my subject choice very broad to be able to have an understanding of business in many different fields because I'm interested in strategy. So saying that, I've sort of got 3 areas that I'm really interested in. One, obviously, more than the other 2. But starting off your career, you obviously don't have as much experience in one concrete area. So I wanted to ask how or what your tips would be in keeping the storyline concrete and streamlined.
Yeah, great question. So my first tip before even getting the narrative is I suggest, and maybe you're doing this already, I would suggest finding people who are in roles that you're thinking about and interested in, and I would ask them to chat and ask them how they got there and what and what they do. So I would do more research. People are very generous. I would reach out to people on LinkedIn. People are willing to help each other out, I think particularly right now, but just in general. So one way to kind of figure out which direction to go in more or where to focus is to talk to people who are in those roles and see if you'd want to go in that direction. And then in terms of honing your narrative, I think this, as you start interviewing, this makes more sense and will get clearer, but because you'll start getting the same types of questions for certain roles. And so you will get better at answering them. And you'll understand what types of answers people are looking for, what types of keywords, what types of answers are strong. And that's what I mean about getting, honing your narrative and getting strong at it. If you are interviewing for 3 different types of roles that are very different, you're just going to get jumbled up, and you have to, each time you prepare, it's going to take more and more energy to prepare for that kind of interview because it's just a totally different role. So there's a couple benefits of kind of sticking to 1, maybe 2 that are because they're sort of parallel or, similar. It's just because you get really strong in the story that you want to convey in the interview. So I would say, pick 2 of those that are most closely related. Once and then just start interviewing and understanding, okay, it sounds like this type of role, these are the day-to-day duties, or this is what it would lead to in 5 years. So maybe actually I want to stick to that. But finding clarity through conversations with others who are in those roles. And then also as you start interviewing, pay attention to sort of what people are looking for, how they want you to answer things, and just see what resonates, I think, for you, and what makes most sense. That would be my sort of tip for that. Is that helpful?
Yes, definitely. I'll still people.
We had a question come through. If Stephanie, can you repeat the 4 styles of questions again?
Yes. Screening questions. So tell me about yourself is a screening question, for example. Just high level, who are you? What are you about? Skill-based questions. So what do you know how to do? Do you know how to use Salesforce? Do you know how to manage a team? Like very tactical skills. Situational questions. So hypothetical situations. How do you respond when a customer is angry? How do you, just hypothetical scenario, what would you do? And then behavioral questions. How have you handled something in the past? Tell me about a time you experienced prioritizing deadlines. How did you do that? Tell me about a time you have received critical feedback and how did you handle it? Those are behavioral questions, and they ask for a story in that STAR format.
Great, thank you. And then we have a live question from Tashara. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I should.
Hi, Tashara.
Good to see you. Hi.
I was like, I can't. It wasn't my screen having malfunction. Is it there? Okay. So my question is, because you talked about how you want to reach out to different companies and you want to reach out on LinkedIn, and I just I guess, so what is a realistic kind of goal, and not to be, because you mentioned that they're generous, but that hasn't been my experience when I've reached out to persons on LinkedIn. I've had and I've done a lot of follow-up where it's not just a one and done. So I guess realistically, what is a kind of I don't know, a ballpark of what I should be aiming for, and not to take it personally, or just be whatever. And I guess what are the steps what's appropriate to when you're reaching out to these persons, and sorry, or what's a strategy? I'm trying to fine tune my question.
Yeah, no, I understand the question. Yeah, that makes sense. So this is where I think volume is really important. And if you think about the more people you reach out to, the higher conversion rate you're going to have. So yes, don't take it personally. People are busy, and follow up. I mean, a lot of people, they're not ignoring you because they're just busy. So it's super important. What I teach people is we create a 3 template email, and every 3 to 4 business days, they're reaching out, just being like, hey, and then if they don't respond, just move on. And I think that's where you have to sort of constantly be researching, which is what Felicity was saying, constantly be adding to your pipeline. So the reason that my clients get jobs really quickly is because the formula that I teach them is to build a pipeline that they're constantly adding to until they sign an offer. So, I have clients that are about to get offers. Actually today, I have a client who's about to get offered, but she's still interviewing because basically nothing's for real until it's for real, and anything could happen. I also had a client the other day about to go on an onsite, and the night before, literally at 9:30 p.m., they canceled it. So for whatever internal reasons. And so you want to really, and this is going to do a couple things. High volume outreach is going to help you have that funnel going. So when companies do fall off, and they will, rejection is a part of the process. So you have to get used to that. Once they fall off, you just have like 6 more, ongoing coming down the pipeline. And that also builds your confidence. It makes you a stronger interviewer because you're constantly interviewing. I mean, the way to get good at interviewing is to do it a lot. I heard this great analogy the other day that a recruiter mentioned, where she said, it's interviewing is kind of like if you got your license and then you only drove a car 7 or 8 times in your life. I mean, you wouldn't be that good at it if you did it that way, right? So we're only going to do it a handful of times, interviewing and all of that. So once you get that confidence and know how to do it, it's a skill that you can then carry forward. So do a high. I tell my clients I need to be doing 30. Some people say 30 to 50, but you can include the sort of the folks that could get you referrals, right? So you can reach out to people in the company, ask if they're willing to chat, and see if they would give you a referral or just insight into the hiring process, especially at the really large companies. I think that's almost necessary to speed up the process. But yes, so reach out on LinkedIn, reach out on email. I teach my clients essentially to be salespeople. You need to know how to sell yourself in this process and be persistent around that. But yeah, Felicity, anything you have to add around that?
Yeah, I was going to say, great question, Shara. I would say, when I look at cold outreach, I usually try and aspirationally go for a 10 to 15% hit rate. And that's kind of optimistic. I'm really I'm assuming that if I'm reaching out to somebody, they don't know me, I don't know them. So they have no obligation to get back to me necessarily. So as I say, aspirationally, I'm looking at a 10 to 15% hit rate. So, equate that down, out of the 30 people that you're reaching out to, you may get 3 responses, and 2 of those responses may be, thanks very much for reaching out, I don't have anything right now. So, you've got to assume that even when you get a response, like that response just makes the next email that you send them in a month warmer than the one that you sent them last month. So it's definitely kind of an ongoing process. The other element, which I think really rings true in what you mentioned, like it's easy to kind of get disheartened by the fact that people don't get back to you. But remember, they don't know you. This is not personal. I would say the one thing which I also try to do, which again is like a really good skill when you're putting yourself into that kind of sales mindset, try and put yourself into the third person a little bit. Try and make it like less about you. This is not a personal attack on you. This is not necessarily whether or not they feel like you'd be good for the opportunity or not good for the opportunity. They don't know you, and therefore they can't possibly assess that. This is perhaps their ability to manage their inbox effectively, or whether or not they've filled the role, or whether or not they're being super proactive. It's not personal. So I think 10% is probably like a good ballpark to be thinking about. Assuming that any rejection has got nothing to do with them, try and get yourself in the mindset of their loss, move on, drop them off the list, add some more people to it. Think about yourself more as third person rather than kind of keep making this like personal to you. If you kind of make it less of an internal process, then it'll keep you motivated. And the one thing which I think is probably actually a really kind of good skill set to get into is really focus your energies and your time on the research into the various different organizations and the various different people, because that will benefit you. First of all, it's interesting. It's interesting to learn about companies and people as you go. And lo and behold, when you do get an interview with somebody and they ask you about, your particular philosophy on one element of whatever skill set it is that you're looking into, and you're able to say, actually, this is how I've done it before, but then I was also reading up on like how Coca-Cola do it the other day, and I was fascinated to learn that like they had implemented X strategy, which I thought was really interesting. And then I read about Susan over at Pepsi, and it seemed like she'd gone in a totally different. You know what? You suddenly sound like a significantly more intelligent candidate to me, who's intellectually curious about your industry, who's researched a whole load of different ways to do things. And before you know it, like that stuff is actually, not only has it been interesting to you in the process, but it will also ultimately benefit you in those interview settings as well, because you can really show an interest in your industry as well. So 10% third person, and try and focus yourself on the research and the interesting elements of this, as opposed to anything which kind of makes you feel like personally rejected. This would be my thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining us today. This has been so fabulous, and I love all the work that you're doing. Where can people find more with you if they love what you're saying? Like, how can they, find out what you're up to?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Park, for having me. It's been really, really great to be here. So coconutcoaching.com is my website, and then LinkedIn is where I'm most active. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect and leverage my network for folks. So definitely reach out there. That's where I'm most active.
Great. And thank you, Felicity, also for joining us. It's really great to get your perspectives. I know we have a lot of resources still available for companies that are interested in working with us. We have toolkits, trainings. We're fully digital in our capacities. So I feel definitely it's nice to get your voice and input on these things, just to give a bit more of what's going on the client side, and just joining us for the conversation today. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Park.
Yeah. So I just wanted to again thank everybody who joined us today. Thank you if you were part of our networking sessions. We will be doing a follow-up survey. So what did you absolutely love? What was kind of schmeh? What did you not care for? Any of that stuff, any ideas or comments that you have, I'm more than happy to get any of that feedback. So you'll get that along with a link to today's webinar and a bunch of resources and links that were mentioned within the session as well. Don't forget that this is part of our spring series. So we do have another one of these chats coming up next week on Wednesday. This will be with Chronically Capable, talking about chronic illness and disability justice through remote and flexible work environments. So that's something that you're interested in, or somebody that's interested in that, I really encourage you to join that conversation, share the link. You can find it on our Eventbrite page, and you can also reach out to us or find us at involvepeople.org. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate having you all here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
So, bye.